A woman returns to her quiet hometown after years away, only to uncover hidden diaries, buried family secrets, and the town's long-silenced tragedy. As she digs deeper, old wounds reopen and alliances fracture, forcing everyone to face the past beneath the quiet stars.
Clara Whitmore's journey back to Willow Creek began just as the sun dipped low behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The familiar sign, weathered and half hidden by creeping ivy, creaked gently in the evening breeze. "Welcome to Willow Creek, where time stands still." It was a phrase she had scoffed at in her youth, but tonight it echoed with a solemn truth. Driving her old sedan along the narrow country road, Clara's gaze flickered to the familiar landmarks: the faded barn with its peeling red paint, the ancient oak tree by the crossroads, and the cluster of tidy houses nestled against the backdrop of dense forest. Yet, even as the sights invoked a bittersweet nostalgia, a strange stillness seemed to press upon her, thick and suffocating. She recalled her childhood here, days of sun-dappled freedom, the scent of fresh earth after rain, the gentle hum of cicadas. But those memories were shadowed by the silence that had grown after her mother's death and her own abrupt departure 10 years ago. The fractures that had splintered her family and the town were invisible but palpable, like the chill in the evening air. Pulling into the driveway of her mother's old house, Clara paused. The house stood stoic, its clapboard siding faded and corners softened by years of neglect. The front porch sagged slightly, and wildflowers had begun to reclaim the garden beds. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as she stepped out. Inside, the house was heavy with stillness. Dust motes floated in the shafts of fading light as Clara moved from room to room, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her feet. The scent of old wood and worn fabric lingered, mingling with the faint aroma of lavender, her mother's favorite. It was as if the house itself held its breath, waiting. On a wooden table in the kitchen lay a stack of unopened mail and a faded photograph of a younger Clara and her mother, smiling beneath a summer sun. She traced the edges of the photo with a trembling finger, memories flooding back: laughter, arguments, and the cold distance that had grown between them. Her solitude was broken by a knock at the door. Opening it, Clara found Maggie Doyle standing there, her auburn curls catching the last light, eyes bright behind her glasses. "Welcome home, Clara," Maggie said softly, her voice a balm yet edged with sadness. Together, they walked to the town diner, a cozy, bustling place where the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the clatter of plates. Helen Graves, the owner, greeted Clara with a warm but guarded smile. The air buzzed with quiet conversations, yet beneath the surface, Clara sensed the weight of stories unspoken. Later, as she wandered past the town hall, the figure of Sheriff Alan Briggs emerged from the shadows. Their eyes met recognition, sparking briefly before a veil of caution settled between them. The years apart had done little to ease the tension. That night, Clara lay awake in her childhood bedroom, the moonlight filtering through lace curtains, illuminating the dust particles that danced like ghosts. The silence pressed close, but beneath it, she sensed a pulse, a heartbeat of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Clara's return was more than a homecoming. It was a reckoning. The town of Willow Creek, with its quiet streets and hushed voices, was a tapestry woven from pain and silence. And she was a thread pulled taut, ready to unravel the stories hidden beneath the quiet stars. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Clara knew the path ahead would be fraught with sorrow and resistance, but also with the fragile hope of healing. The journey had begun. Clara Whitmore stood at the threshold of the old house, the wooden floorboards creaking softly beneath her feet as she stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the faint, lingering scent of lavender, a fragrance her mother had always favored. The walls, once bright with life, now wore a muted patina of age and neglect, the peeling wallpaper telling stories of summers long past and winters endured in silence. She moved through the familiar rooms with a hesitance born not from unfamiliarity but from the weight of memories. Each corner seemed to whisper fragments of a past she had tried to bury, yet now faced head-on. The house was a repository of her mother's life, and now of Clara's own history, a history tangled with grief, secrets, and unspoken truths. In the study, Clara found solace amid the cluttered desk and overflowing bookshelves. She sank down cross-legged on the floor, her fingers trembling as she opened a tarnished wooden box she had found hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside lay a collection of letters, their edges frayed and yellowed with time, alongside black and white photographs that captured moments frozen in sorrow and joy. With each letter she unfolded, Clara felt herself pulled deeper into the labyrinth of her mother's concealed life. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, words carefully chosen yet laden with emotion. There were references to people she barely remembered, cryptic mentions of events that hinted at pain and betrayal, and an undercurrent of fear that threaded through the pages. One photograph in particular caught her eye, a portrait of her mother standing beside a group of townspeople, faces etched with a mixture of pride and pain. Clara's gaze lingered, trying to decipher the stories behind those eyes, the secrets those smiles withheld. The next morning, seeking answers, Clara made her way to the Willow Creek Library, a place that had once been a haven during her childhood. The familiar scent of aged paper and polished wood greeted her like an old friend. Behind the counter stood Maggie Doyle, her childhood confidant, whose warm smile and steady presence offered a rare comfort in a town shadowed by silence. "Clara," Maggie said softly, her eyes reflecting both surprise and understanding. "It's been too long." "Too long," Clara echoed, grateful for the familiarity amid the strangeness of returning. Maggie led her to a secluded corner of the library, revealing a hidden cabinet brimming with town records, diaries, and forgotten archives. As they sifted through brittle pages and faded documents, Clara felt the threads of Willow Creek's history begin to unravel. The stories they uncovered were not just her family's, but woven into the fabric of the entire community, stories of loss, regret, and the heavy cost of silence. In the quiet moments between discoveries, Clara and Maggie shared whispered conversations, their voices barely rising above the rustle of pages. The weight of what they were uncovering settled around them like a tangible presence, yet beneath it all lay a spark of hope, a hope that understanding might lead to healing. As twilight deepened outside, casting long shadows across the library's wooden floors, Clara closed a fragile journal, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. The past was no longer a distant echo. It was a living, breathing force demanding her attention. "There's more to uncover," Maggie said, her voice steady but resolute. Clara nodded, the resolve in her eyes hardening. "I have to know the truth." And so, beneath the quiet stars that watched over Willow Creek, Clara Whitmore began the painful journey of peeling back the layers of silence, seeking the stories that would finally bring light to the shadows of her family's past and the town's collective wounds. The days that followed saw Clara immersed in a delicate dance between memory and discovery. Each letter she read, each photograph she examined, added pieces to a puzzle that had remained frustratingly incomplete for decades. Some documents were straightforward, recounting mundane events, a family gathering, a town meeting, but others hinted at fractures beneath the surface. One letter spoke of a disagreement between her mother and a town official, veiled in polite language, but heavy with unspoken tension. Another contained a poem, its verses dripping with sorrow and regret, signed with a name Clara did not recognize. She felt the weight of that unknown sorrow pressing down, a burden passed down silently through generations. Maggie became more than a guide. She was a partner in Clara's quest, offering insights drawn from her own deep knowledge of Willow Creek's history. She shared tales whispered among the town's oldest residents, stories that had never found their way into official records. With Maggie's help, Clara began to see the outlines of a shared trauma, an event or series of events that had shaped the town and its people in profound ways. One afternoon, as rain pattered gently against the library windows, Clara and Maggie spread out a collection of photographs and letters on a large oak table. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows. "Look at this," Maggie said, pointing to a photograph of a young woman standing apart from a group. "That's your mother, isn't it?" Clara nodded. "Yes, she looks different here. There's something about her expression, like she's carrying a secret no one else knows." Clara traced the outline of her mother's face with a finger, feeling an H that was both intimate and distant. "I never knew this side of her." Maggie smiled gently. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories. The more Clara learned, the more she realized how much had been kept from her and from everyone else. The town's peaceful facade was a careful construction, one maintained by silence and omission. But silence, she now understood, was not peace. It was a fragile barrier holding back a tide of pain. As evening fell, Clara closed her notebook and looked out the window at the darkening sky. The stars began to pepper the heavens, distant and indifferent to the turmoil below. Yet beneath their quiet glow, Clara felt a melancholic hope that perhaps, through unveiling these hidden truths, healing might begin. She whispered to the night, "I'm ready." And somewhere deep within the walls of Willow Creek, the past stirred, waiting to be finally heard. That night, back in her mother's house, Clara sat once again in the study, the letters and photographs spread before her like silent witnesses. She picked up a small, leather-bound diary, its cover cracked with age. With a deep breath, she opened it to the first page. The handwriting was delicate, flowing, and unmistakably her mother's. "To my dearest Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to tell you in person. There are truths I could never voice aloud, fears I hoped would never come to light. But silence has a weight too heavy to bear alone. I hope these pages bring you understanding, even if they bring pain." Clara's hands trembled as she read, the words weaving a tapestry of love, regret, and sorrow. The diary was a key, a gateway into a past long hidden, and a promise that the silence might finally be broken. Outside, the stars shone quietly, watching over a town on the brink of awakening. The diner was a small island of warmth and light in the midst of the slow, settling dusk that cloaked Willow Creek. Clara pushed open the door, and was greeted by the familiar clang of the bell overhead, a sound that seemed both welcoming and weighted with memories. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint sweetness of apple pie, a sensory comfort that contrasted sharply with the unease settling in her chest. Helen Graves stood behind the counter, her soft eyes lighting up with a cautious welcome as she wiped a glass with a threadbare cloth. "Clara," she greeted, voice low but steady, "it's been a while. You look well." Clara offered a small smile, sliding onto a stool at the worn counter. The diner's faded linoleum floor creaked beneath her boots, the hum of quiet conversation punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery. "It's good to see you, Helen." Helen leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if the walls themselves might listen. "People have been talking, she said, her gaze flickering toward the window where the last light of day softened the edges of the town. "About your coming back." Clara's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "And what have they been saying?" A brief pause, then Helen's voice dropped further, a whisper barely above the din around them. "That some wounds here don't heal with time. That some truths are better left buried." The words hung heavy between them, loaded with meaning. Clara knew this town well enough to understand the layers beneath Helen's caution, the unspoken histories, the fractures disguised as peace. Before she could ask more, the door opened again, admitting a gust of cool evening air and Sheriff Alan Briggs. His presence was commanding yet subdued, the lines etched into his face deepened by years of watching over a community that often preferred silence to confrontation. "Clara," he said, nodding in greeting, his voice edged with a careful neutrality. "I hear you've been asking questions." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I need to understand what happened here, Alan, For my mother, for the town. He sighed, the weight of his role evident. Some stones are best left unturned, he warned softly, though his eyes betrayed his own internal conflict. Digging too deep can unsettle things no one is ready to face. But silence has its own cost, Clara replied, a quiet defiance threading her words. I can't ignore what's been hidden any longer. The sheriff's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the two stood there, caught between the past and the present, between protection and revelation. Later, as Clara walked through the town's main street, the low murmur of voices followed her like an unseen current. Faces turned away, whispers tapered off. The town's shared secret seemed to pulse beneath the surface, a fragile web of silence that both shielded and suffocated. Returning to the diner, Clara found Helen sitting alone at a booth, her eyes distant yet sharp. You will find the truth isn't kind, Helen said softly, and some people will do anything to keep it hidden. Clara nodded, the resolve in her heart stealing further. Then I'll have to be ready. Helen reached out, placing a gentle hand over Clara's. Just remember, sometimes the deepest scars are the ones we can't see. The night deepened outside, stars beginning to prick the sky with quiet light. Beneath those quiet stars, Clara felt the weight of the town's silence pressing close, but also the faintest flicker of hope, a hope that maybe, through truth and courage, healing could begin. She left the diner with a mind swirling with questions and a heart burdened with the knowledge that her journey was only just beginning. The whispers among neighbors were more than idle talk, they were the echoes of a past that refused to stay buried, calling her to listen, to understand, and to confront. As she walked back to her mother's old house, the wind carried the soft sounds of Willow Creek settling into night. The quiet stars overhead a silent witness to the secrets waiting to be uncovered. Clara pulled her coat tighter against the evening chill as she approached the Whitmore farmhouse, the familiar gravel crunching beneath her boots. Years away had done little to erase the imprint of this place in her memory, but the sight of the weathered porch and faded shutters brought a sharp pang of unease. The house stood stubbornly against the creeping dusk, a sentinel of past sorrows and fractured bonds. She hesitated a moment before raising her hand to knock, the sound echoing softly in the stillness. The door swung open, revealing Tom Whitmore, his broad frame filling the doorway. Lines traced his face like map routes of hardship, and his eyes, sharp yet wary, studied her with a mixture of surprise and guarded wariness. "Clara," he said, voice rough but steady, "it's been a long time." "Too long," she replied softly, stepping inside as he moved aside. The warmth of the house wrapped around her, mingled with the faint scent of wood, smoke, and old leather. The kitchen was modest but tidy, the table scarred with years of use and memories. Tom gestured toward the seat opposite him, settling down with a grunt. Silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy, before Clara ventured, "I'm here to settle Mom's things, but I also need to understand." His lips pressed into a thin line. Understand what? What really happened? Between all of us, between the family and the town. Tom's gaze dropped to his hands, knuckles white as they gripped the edge of the table. "You think there's more to it than you were told?" She nodded. "I can feel it. The silence, the way people avoid looking me in the eye. It's like the whole town is holding its breath, waiting for the past to break free." He exhaled slowly, the weight of years evident in his posture. "It's not easy, Clara, what you were asking about. It's tangled up in pain and mistakes. Things I hoped would never see the light again." Her voice softened. "I don't want to blame anyone. I just want to know the truth." Tom's eyes flickered with something unspoken regret, perhaps, or fear. Truth has a way of tearing things apart before it can heal. "Are you ready for that?" Before she could answer, he reached to the corner of the table and pulled forward a worn photograph album. The cover was cracked, pages yellowed with age. Opening it, he pointed to a faded image of a younger Clara with her mother, smiling under the summer sun. "Your mother was different back then. Full of hope, before things went wrong." Clara traced a finger over the picture, a lump rising in her throat. "What happened, Uncle Tom?" He swallowed hard, voice thick with emotion. "There were choices made, secrets kept. People who paid the price in silence and sorrow. I wanted to protect you from all that." The room felt smaller, the shadows deeper as the past pressed in on them. Yet beneath the layers of pain, Clara sensed a flicker of something fragile, a willingness to bridge the gap years had carved between them. As twilight gave way to night, they stepped onto the porch together. The cool air was crisp, scented with pine and earth, and the first stars blinked awake overhead. Words fell away, replaced by a shared quiet that was both tentative and profound. Clara looked up at the sky, whispering, "Maybe it's time to stop hiding, to start healing." Tom nodded slowly, his usual reserve softened by the weight of truth finally stirring to the surface. "Maybe it is." And beneath the quiet stars, a fragile hope began to take root, binding family and town in a delicate promise of understanding yet to come. The evening stretched long, filled with fragile confessions and the slow dismantling of walls built from years of silence. Clara's heart beat steadily as she listened, piecing together fragments of a story shed only glimpsed in shadows. Tom's guarded words hinted at betrayals and regrets that reached far beyond their family, threading through the very fabric of Willow Creek itself. Their conversation, though tentative, marked the first step of many a journey into the heart of grief, where secrets waited patiently to be faced. And as the night deepened, Clara realized that to heal, she would have to navigate not only the fractures within her bloodline, but also the unspoken wounds of a community bound by silence. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with pain, but for the first time in years, Clara felt the stirrings of connection, a fragile thread weaving her back into the place she once called home. What truths lay buried beneath the surface? And how much would it cost to bring them into the light? The answers awaited in the quiet spaces between words, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars overhead. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the tall, narrow windows of the Willow Creek Library, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. Clara Whitmore stood hesitantly at the threshold of the basement archives, a place she had not visited since childhood visits with Maggie Doyle, when the mysteries of the town felt distant and irrelevant. Now the air was thick with the musty scent of aged paper and forgotten memories, the weight of silence pressing in around them. Maggie adjusted her glasses and flicked on the overhead light, illuminating rows of shelves burdened with brittle ledgers, yellowed newspapers, and dusty boxes. "There's a lot here," she said softly, her voice a comforting echo in the quiet space, "but I have a feeling we'll find what you were looking for." Clara nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. The years away from Willow Creek had done little to dull the ache of her fractured past. She stepped forward, her fingers tracing the spines of books and files as if seeking a thread to unravel the tangled web of her family's history. After several minutes of searching through documents that spoke of town meetings and property deeds, Maggie's hand paused on a small, unassuming leather-bound book tucked between larger volumes. "Wait," she whispered, pulling it free. This wasn't catalogued properly. Clara took the diary, its worn cover soft beneath her fingers, the initials E.W. embossed faintly on the front sent a chill down her spine. Her mother's handwriting filled the delicate pages, a private world preserved in ink. They settled at a nearby table, the diary resting between them like a fragile bridge to the past. Clara's breath caught as she read the first entry, penned in a neat, deliberate script. April 3, 1978. Today felt heavier than usual. The town's smiles hide shadows I can no longer ignore. I fear the silence is suffocating us all. As she turned each page, Clara uncovered intimate reflections, her mother's fears, moments of despair, and veiled references to an event that had reshaped the town's fate. The words hinted at betrayals and losses that had been carefully concealed beneath years of polite conversation and avoidance. Outside, the wind picked up, rain drumming against the windows like a mournful rhythm. The storm's presence seemed to echo the turmoil rising within Clara. She paused on a passage marked with a faded ribbon. The night of July 12th remains a wound we dare not expose. Yet the truth festers beneath our footsteps, waiting for the day it can no longer be silenced. Maggie's gaze met Clara's, steady and encouraging. "You are not alone in this," she said quietly. "The town's history is woven with these secrets, but uncovering them is the first step toward healing." Clara closed the diary gently, a mixture of sorrow and determination settling over her. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with pain, but the truth buried within these hidden pages was a beacon she could no longer ignore. "We need to find out what happened that night," Clara murmured, her voice steady despite the storm raging outside. "For my family. For Willow Creek." Maggie nodded, already pulling a map of the town's old records toward her. Together, they began to piece together the fragments of a story long suppressed, the beginning of a journey that would challenge every silence and shadow in Willow Creek. As the day faded into evening, the library's quiet corners seemed to pulse with a newfound energy of fragile hope that beneath the weight of secrets, healing might yet be possible. Clara tucked the diary into her bag, the hidden pages a silent promise that the past would not be forgotten, and the future might still be rewritten. The storm outside softened, the first stars emerging through the dissipating clouds. Beneath the quiet sky, Clara felt the stirrings of courage grow within her, a resolve to bring light to the darkness that had long shrouded her family and the town she once called home. Clara Whitmore hesitated on the creaking steps of the modest church at the heart of Willow Creek, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the weathered wooden door. The scent of aged pine and beeswax greeted her as she pushed it open, stepping inside the sanctuary where whispered prayers and stained glass-filtered light softened the air. She wasn't sure what she sought here, perhaps a refuge from the relentless questions that had already begun to consume her since her return, or maybe a flicker of guidance amidst the uncertainty. Reverend Paul Mason rose from a wooden pew near the altar, his salt and pepper hair catching the glow of the sun as he approached with a measured, gentle smile. He was a man shaped by years of service, his presence calm and unassuming, with eyes that held both kindness and a shadow of wariness. "Clara," he said, voice warm but quiet, "it's been too long." She nodded, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. "Too long," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. They settled into the small office adjoining the sanctuary, the walls lined with faded photographs of past congregants and shelves heavy with well-thumbed hymnals and worn Bibles. Paul gestured toward an armchair by the window. "Tell me what weighs on your heart." Clara exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. "I came back to settle my mother's affairs," she began, "but it's become something more. There are secrets. So many unspoken things here, beneath the quiet streets and familiar faces." Paul nodded solemnly, his fingers steepled before him. "Willow Creek has always been a place of silence, Clara. Not because there is nothing to say, but because the truth often carries a weight too heavy to bear." She looked out the window, watching as a breeze stirred the autumn leaves outside, their rustling a soft murmur in the stillness. "I feel like I'm walking through a house filled with locked doors, and every one I open brings more shadows." "That is the nature of healing," Paul said quietly. "We must confront the darkness if we are to find peace. But it is not an easy path." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Clara's heart quickened when Elias Harper stepped inside, his conservative suit impeccably pressed, his weathered face set in a stern expression. The sharp glint in his eyes betrayed the years of unyielding resolve he carried as one of the town's oldest and most influential figures. Reverend Elias greeted, his voice formal but edged with tension. "Clara, I see you've found sanctuary here." Clara stood, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm just seeking answers." Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. "Some answers are better left buried. This town has survived by protecting its stories, by preserving a fragile peace. Digging too deep risks tearing everything apart. Paul shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his eyes flickering between the two. "I understand your concerns, Elias," Clara replied, "but silence has only prolonged the pain. We can't heal by pretending nothing happened. You restirring a hornet's nest," Elias warned, stepping closer. "There are wounds here that will not mend with exposure." The room seemed to close in around them, the weight of unspoken histories pressing down like the fading light outside. After Elias left, Paul sighed deeply, sinking into his chair. He speaks from a place of fear, but also of guilt. The past is a heavy burden for many here. I wrestle with it myself. Clara watched him, sensing the internal battle beneath his calm exterior. "Do you believe we can find forgiveness?" Paul's gaze dropped to his clasped hands. "Faith teaches me to hope, but the path is never straightforward. Willow Creek's wounds run deep, and the healing will be slow and painful." As twilight descended, Clara stepped outside, the cool evening air crisp against her skin. The oak trees lining the street whispered secrets in the breeze, their leaves shimmering beneath the rising stars. She felt the weight of the town's silence pressing in, but also the fragile stirrings of resolve within her. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with opposition and old fears, yet she knew she could not turn back. In the quiet of the church sanctuary, Reverend Paul knelt in prayer, candlelight flickering against the stone walls. His whispered words were both plea and confession, a struggle between his calling and the shadows that clung to the town's soul. That night, as the stars blinked softly over Willow Creek, the uneasy alliances forming in the shadows promised that the silence would soon be broken, but at a price. The evening air in Willow Creek was thick with an unspoken unease, the kind that settled like a shroud over the town whenever Clara ventured too close to the buried past. Word of her relentless inquiries had spread quietly but swiftly, reaching the ears of those who wished the past to remain undisturbed. It was at the heart of this storm that Elias Harper moved with calculated precision. In the shadowed confines of the old town hall, a place that once echoed with civic pride now whispered secrets and fears, Elias convened a gathering of the town's elders. The room was small, the walls lined with peeling paint and faded photographs that seemed to watch silently as the men and women assembled. A haze of tobacco smoke curled lazily beneath the dim glow of a single overhead bulb, mingling with the scent of aged wood and the faint musk of damp earth that crept in through cracked windows. Elias stood at the head of the long, scarred table, his weathered face etched with lines of both age and burden. His sharp eyes, unyielding and resolute, scanned the gathered faces, some stoic, others visibly anxious. He spoke in a voice low and steady, each word deliberate. "This town's peace depends on what we choose to reveal and what we must keep to ourselves," he said, his tone carrying the weight of years spent guarding Willow Creek's fragile facade. "Clara's digging threatens to unravel everything. We must stand firm." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, but beneath the surface stirred a complex web of guilt and fear. The town's silence was not born merely of stubbornness, but of a shared burden too heavy to bear openly. Elias embodied this resistance, the desire to shield Willow Creek from the pain that might consume it if exposed. Meanwhile, Clara sat on the creaking porch of her mother's old house, the sky above shifting from a bruised lavender to the deep indigo of night. The first stars blinked awake, indifferent to the turmoil below. In her hands she held a photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. She traced the faded faces, feeling a pang of solitude so profound it almost silenced her defiant heartbeat. The warmth of the house behind her was gone, replaced by the cold reality of isolation and mounting opposition. Yet in this moment of loneliness, Clara found something steadier, a quiet resolve that whispered she must press on. The silence of Willow Creek was fracturing, and though the weight was heavy, she was no longer willing to carry it alone. The following day, the library became a sanctuary of sorts. Among rows of musty books and fragile manuscripts, Clara and Maggie Doyle huddled close, their voices hushed beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. They pored over yellowed letters and brittle diaries, each page a thread unraveling the tapestry of Willow Creek's hidden past. Maggie's eyes sparkled behind her glasses, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "These stories," she whispered, "they're the town's heartbeat. If we can share them, maybe we can start to heal." Clara nodded, feeling the fragile camaraderie between them strengthen her resolve. Here, in the quiet stacks, the weight of secrecy felt lighter, carried between two who dared to listen. As dusk settled, Tom Whitmore stood silently outside his weathered farmhouse, the mist curling around the fields like restless spirits. His broad shoulders were hunched, his lined face drawn tight with the burden of memories he'd long tried to bury. Watching the rolling fog, he wrestled with the truths he'd kept locked away, truths that Clara's return had begun to stir. Inside, the town's silence was fracturing. The elders' resistance grew more palpable, their veiled threats and whispered warnings casting long shadows over Clara's every step. Yet within her, a quiet defiance blossomed, an unyielding determination to pierce the collective veil of silence and bring light to the darkness that had long suffocated Willow Creek. The night deepened, wrapping the town beneath quiet stars that bore witness to the unraveling of secrets and the fragile hope that, perhaps, healing was still within reach. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the tall, narrow windows of the Willow Creek Public Library, casting long, golden beams across the worn wooden tables and scattered stacks of old books. Clara Whitmore sat beside Maggie Doyle at one such table, their heads bent close together as they sifted through yellowed newspapers and brittle letters that smelled faintly of dust and time. The quiet room was filled with a gentle symphony, the soft rustle of paper, the occasional creak of the old floorboards, and the subtle hum of the overhead lights. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight, catching the light like tiny stars suspended in air. "Look at this," Maggie whispered, her voice barely above a breath as she pointed to a faded article dated back nearly 50 years. "The Willow Creek Festival, 1974. It was supposed to be a celebration, music, dancing, the whole town coming together. But it ended badly." Clara leaned in, eyes scanning the cramped typeface. The article hinted at a sudden tragedy, a mysterious accident that had left several families devastated. Names leapt out at Clara, names she recognized from her own family tree and the town's history. Her heart quickened. The festival, something so alive and communal, had become a pivot point of sorrow and silence. "I never knew about this," Clara murmured, tracing the words with her finger. "Why was it never spoken of?" Maggie sighed, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Because sometimes the past is too painful, the town just agreed to forget, to keep the wounds hidden under the surface. But the scars are still there, Clara. We just don't see them every day." Outside, a sudden summer rain began, droplets tapping softly against the library's leaded glass windows. The rhythmic patter was soothing yet haunting, as if the very weather mourned the buried grief. Maggie's voice grew softer, tinged with a bittersweet nostalgia. "I remember my grandmother telling me stories about that festival. How it changed everything, how people stopped trusting one another, how silence fell like a shroud over Willow Creek." Clara looked up, meeting Maggie's eyes, and saw the weight of generations reflected there. "It feels like we're standing on the edge of something," she said quietly. "Like if we pull at one thread, the whole tapestry might unravel." Maggie nodded. Maybe it's time it did. They spent hours lost in the archives, piecing together fragmented memories and faded records. In a dim back room, walls lined with corkboards cluttered with sepia photographs and handwritten notes, Clara paused before a particularly worn image. It showed a group of townsfolk gathered beneath a banner for the 1974 festival, their faces a mixture of joy and apprehension. Her fingers hovered over the photo, tracing the outlines of familiar faces, friends, neighbors, family members. A sudden clarity washed over her. The tangled web of relationships, betrayals and losses began to emerge from the shadows. The image was not just a snapshot of a happy day, but a silent testament to the fractures beneath the town's surface. They all knew each other, Clara whispered. Their lives were so intertwined. No wonder the whole town carries the same weight. Maggie smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and sadness. We all connected in ways we don't always want to admit. That's the burden and the blessing of a small town like Willow Creek. As dusk settled, the two women stepped out into the cool evening air. The scent of pine and damp earth wrapped around them like a comforting cloak, mingling with the faint smell of rain on the breeze. Quiet surrounded them, but it was charged now, alive with the promise of revelation and the unspoken understanding that their journey into Willow Creek's past had only just begun. Clara inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the day's discoveries settle inside her. There was pain, yes, but also a fragile hope, a chance to bring light to the silent corners of the town's history and, perhaps, begin the slow work of healing. "What happens next?" Maggie asked, her voice breaking the silence. Clara met her gaze, determination hardening in her eyes. "We keep going. We uncover everything, no matter how hard it gets." And beneath the quiet stars beginning to prick the twilight sky, the town of Willow Creek awaited the unraveling of its long-held secrets, its breath held in anticipation of the healing that might follow. The annual festival of Willow Creek was a tradition that pulsed through the town's veins like a lifeline, a fragile thread woven with laughter, music, and the aroma of homemade pies, a rare moment when the community came together under the same sky, if only briefly. This year, however, the familiar sounds and sights held an undercurrent that Clara could not ignore. As she stepped into the festival square, the golden light of dusk wrapped around the lanterns strung from the old oak tree, casting dancing shadows that seemed to flicker with secrets. Families gathered at picnic tables laden with steaming dishes, children ran with painted faces, and the local band struck up a tune that mingled with the murmurs of the crowd. Yet beneath the festive veneer, Clara sensed something else, a tautness in the smiles, a hesitation in conversations, a charged silence between glances. It was as if the town held its breath, wary of the past stirring beneath the surface. Her footsteps took her past familiar faces, Helen Graves, bustling behind a stall, offering pie slices with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sheriff Alan Briggs, standing near the edge of the square, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp as it briefly met hers. The past they shared, some tender, some fraught, whispered in the spaces between them. Clara's heart tightened when she spotted Maggie Doyle, whose curly auburn hair caught the lantern light like embers. Maggie smiled warmly, beckoning her over to the library's modest booth, where a display of old photographs and town memorabilia drew quiet interest. The scent of fried pies mingled with the crisp evening air, and Maggie's voice lowered to a comforting murmur as she shared stories behind the images, stories Clara had only begun to uncover. "You were stirring up old ghosts, Clara," Maggie said, her eyes reflecting concern and hope. "But maybe it's time they saw the light." Before Clara could respond, a ripple of tension broke through the crowd. Near the old oak tree, Alias Harper emerged, his weathered face set in a scowl that spoke volumes. His sharp eyes scanned the gathering until they locked on Clara's. With a deliberate step forward, he approached, his conservative attire a stark contrast to the casual surroundings. "This isn't your town anymore," Elia said quietly, though his voice carried easily on the evening breeze. "You come back, digging through old wounds like a storm, threatening to tear apart what little peace we have left." Clara met his gaze steadily. "The peace built on silence is a fragile thing, Elias, and silence isn't healing." Their words hung in the air, drawing the attention of nearby townsfolk who exchanged wary glances. Maggie moved closer, her presence a quiet shield, while Helen and Sheriff Briggs watched from a distance, their expressions unreadable. As the festival music swelled, the confrontation between Clara and Elias became a microcosm of the town's divide between those who wished to protect the past by burying it and those who believed truth was the only path forward. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some voices anxious, others emboldened. Away from the growing tension, Tom Whitmore remained on the fringes, his broad shoulders hunched as he stared into the bonfire. The flickering flames illuminated the lines etched deep into his face, the weight of years pressing heavily on him. Fireworks burst overhead, their brilliant colors stark against the night sky, mirroring the turmoil that churned within him. Clara caught his gaze briefly, a silent exchange passing between them, a mixture of regret, sorrow, and the faintest glimmer of reconciliation. The festival, with all its lights and shadows, had become a crucible for Willow Creek's buried truths. As the evening deepened, Clara wandered the lantern-lit paths, feeling the pulse of the town, its hopes, its fears, its unspoken griefs. The festival was no longer just a celebration, it was a turning point. With each whispered conversation and every guarded glance, the fragile tapestry of Willow Creek's silence began to unravel. The night ended not with the comfort of closure, but with the sharp edge of anticipation. Beneath the quiet stars, Clara knew the path ahead would demand courage from everyone to confront the shadows that clung to the town's heart and to find, perhaps, a way toward healing. And as the last firework faded into the dark, the question lingered in the cool night air: how many more truths could Willow Creek bear before the silence finally broke? The town hall was alive with a restless energy that evening, the kind that prickled the skin and sat heavy in the chest. Clara Whitmore stood near the front, her dark hair loosely tied back, eyes scanning the room filled with faces she had known all her life, some welcoming, others guarded, many wary. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of townsfolk who had come to witness what was quickly becoming a defining moment for Willow Creek. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and fading whispers of secrets long buried. Elias Harper took the floor with a measured but firm step, his weathered face a mask of resolve beneath sharp eyes. Dressed impeccably in his usual conservative attire, he commanded attention as a pillar of the town's old guard. This gathering, he began, voice steady and carrying, is not a place for stirring old wounds that might never heal. There are truths, yes, but some are too dangerous to uncover. To dig into the past recklessly risks tearing apart the fragile peace we have maintained for years. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging uneasy glances. Clara's heart pounded, but she held her ground, the weight of her mother's diary and the mounting evidence fueling her resolve. "Miss Harper," she replied, voice clear though tinged with fatigue. "Peace built on silence and fear is no peace at all. The truth is painful, but it's the only way to understand who we are and begin to heal." The room seemed to hold its breath. Maggie Doyle, seated near the back, adjusted her glasses, her eyes bright with a fierce determination that mirrored Clara's. She was more than a librarian tonight. She was a guardian of stories, a keeper of the town's fractured history, urging the community to listen. Tom Whitmore sat quietly, his broad shoulders tense beneath his worn work shirt. His lined face betrayed the conflict within. When Clara's gaze met his across the room, she saw a flicker of vulnerability that unsettled her. This was not merely a battle between past and present. It was a collision of loyalty, guilt, and the desire for redemption. Elias pressed on, his tone sharpening. "Clara, your investigations are tearing families apart. You risk not just our reputation, but the very fabric of Willow Creek. We cannot afford to forget the past, but some things are best left buried." Voices rose, some in support, others in protest. The town hall became a battleground of ideals, the silence that had once suffocated Willow Creek now fracturing under the strain of truth. Clara felt the sting of their opposition, but also the quiet strength of those who stood with her. Later, stepping outside into the cool night, Clara breathed deeply, the chorus of cicadas filling the dark. The stars above were distant and silent witnesses to the town's turmoil. Here, beneath these quiet stars, She felt the weight of her choice. The cost of truth was great, but so was the cost of silence. And in that moment, despite the shadows that clung to Willow Creek, a fragile hope took root within her, a hope that healing, however slow and painful, was possible. As she turned back toward the hall, Clara knew the path ahead would be difficult. The crossroads of truth had been reached, and there was no turning back now. The town's future and her own depended on what came next. The faded light of late afternoon filtered through the cracked window panes of the Whitmore farmhouse kitchen, casting long shadows over the worn wooden table where Clara Whitmore sat facing her Uncle Tom. The air was thick with unspoken words and memories too painful to voice. For years, the silence between them had been as heavy as the dust that coated the shelves and faded photographs lining the walls. Clara's fingers traced the grain of the table absently, eyes flickering to Tom's broad-shouldered frame, tense and awkward in the chair opposite her. His lined face bore the marks of years spent under the sun and in the fields, a stark contrast to her own city-honed features. But the shared blood between them was undeniable. Yet for all their kinship, the gulf carved by grief and resentment loomed wide. "Tom," Clara began, her voice low but steady. "I came back to understand, to face what happened. But I can't do it alone. I need to know everything." He shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the tabletop as if searching for courage among the cracks. After a long pause, he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Clara, there's a lot I've kept buried. Things I thought protecting you from would spare us both. But maybe that was a mistake." The words hung between them, fragile and tentative. Clara's heart quickened not with anger, but with a flicker of hope that the walls might finally crumble. "Tell me, Tom, please." He nodded slowly, gathering himself. "It started long before you left. The night your mother—" His voice faltered, but the dam broke as he confessed to his involvement in the family's darkest moments. "I was scared, foolish. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping silent, by protecting the family. But all I did was add to the pain." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, not from anger but from the release of years of pent-up grief. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you shut me out?" "Because I didn't know how, because I was ashamed. But avoiding the truth only made it worse." In that small, worn kitchen, the fragile threads of trust began to weave anew. Tom led Clara through the shadows of their shared history, each revelation a step toward understanding the tangled roots of their sorrow. Later, in the barn where relics of the past lay scattered beneath layers of dust, Clara ran her fingers over faded photographs and old tools, feeling the presence of those who had come before. The air was thick with the scent of hay and forgotten memories. Tom's voice was softer here, less guarded as he recounted stories he had never dared share. Their grief, once isolating, became a bridge. A sudden summer rain began to patter against the windows of the farmhouse, a gentle rhythm that accompanied Clara as she read aloud a letter from her mother discovered among the hidden papers. Her voice trembled, carrying the weight of love and regret, while Tom listened, his expression a mixture of sorrow and relief. As twilight deepened, they found themselves side by side on the porch, the cool air carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Above them, the first stars appeared, quiet witnesses to their tentative reconciliation. The silence between them was no longer a barrier, but a shared space for healing. "Maybe, just maybe," Clara whispered, "we can find a way forward." Tom nodded, the lines of his face softening in the starlight. Together, the bonds tested by time and tragedy had begun to mend, fragile but unbroken as the night embraced Willow Creek beneath its quiet stars. The church was a sanctuary of muted light and lingering shadows when Clara Whitmore pushed open the heavy wooden door. A faint scent of aged wood and candle wax greeted her as the stained glass windows cast fractured colors across the stone floor. The quiet was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of the late afternoon breeze slipping through a cracked window. Reverent and still, the space seemed to hold its breath as if waiting. Reverend Paul Mason sat alone in one of the worn pews near the altar, his posture bowed under the weight of unseen burdens. His silvering hair caught the fading light, and the gentle lines around his eyes spoke of years spent tending to the spiritual needs of Willow Creek. Yet today there was a fragility in his presence that Clara had never noticed before. As she approached, he looked up, eyes meeting hers with a mixture of surprise and quiet relief. "Clara," he greeted softly, his voice a careful blend of warmth and caution. "I wasn't expecting you today." She offered a small, tentative smile. "I needed to talk to someone who understands more than just the facts." He gestured to the pew beside him, and she sat, her fingers clasping the strap of her bag tightly. The silence stretched between them, heavy and laden with unspoken words. Finally, Reverend Paul sighed, a sound that seemed to carry decades of doubt and sorrow. "This town," he began, voice low and steady, "it's been built on faith in God, faith in family, faith in the quiet that keeps us safe. But sometimes that faith feels like a shroud, a weight that stifles truth and buries pain." Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the flickering candle on the altar. "I can feel it everywhere, the silence. It's like a second skin, impossible to shed." He leaned forward, hands entwined. "Ivy prayed for guidance, for the strength to lead this community through its darkness. But lately, I question if my faith is enough. The secrets we keep, they gnaw at the soul." A sudden tremor of vulnerability softened his features. "I fear that in protecting the town, Ivy contributed to its suffering. That in choosing silence, Ivy betrayed the very hope I once preached." Clara reached out, briefly touching his hand. "It's not just you. We're all caught between what we want to believe and what we need to face. But staying silent, it only deepens the wounds." He looked away toward the stained glass, where the last rays of sunlight turned the colors into a kaleidoscope of broken light. "Perhaps the path forward is through that light, no matter how fractured it seems." Outside, the muffled voices of the town drifted faintly through the open door, the laughter of children, the murmur of neighbors, the distant hum of the evening settling in. It was a reminder that the community was alive, fragile, and yearning for release from its hidden burdens. Clara stood slowly, the weight of Reverend Paul's confession settling within her like a stone anchored deep in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your honesty, for reminding me that even faith can be tested." He smiled, a wary but genuine curve of his lips. "And thank you, Clara, for being here. For reminding us all that truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward healing." Stepping out into the cool air, Clara inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and autumn leaves filling her lungs. The sky above Willow Creek was a canvas of soft twilight hues, stars beginning to pierce the dusk with quiet brilliance. Beneath those quiet stars, she carried the fragile hope that even the heaviest silences could be broken, that beneath the weight of secrets, healing was possible. As she walked away from the church, the shadows lengthened but did not consume. Instead, they seemed to fold gently around her, as if to hold her steady for the difficult journey ahead. And in that somber embrace, Clara found a renewed courage to listen, to confront, and to bring light to the darkness that had long defined her home. The night whispered promises of change, and Clara was ready to answer its call. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the cluttered table where Clara and Maggie sat, surrounded by piles of yellowed letters, brittle photographs, and fraying diaries. Outside, the sky darkened with the threat of rain, thunder murmuring a distant warning, as if the weather itself sympathized with the turbulence stirring beneath Willow Creek's placid surface. Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded a fragile sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the ink smudged in places, the words heavy with the weight of withheld sorrow. "This one," she whispered, "this might be the key." Maggie leaned closer, her glasses catching the light. "It's from your great-aunt Evelyn," she said, referencing a woman whose name had only come up in hushed conversations thus far. She mentions a gathering, a meeting of the families right before the incident everyone wants to forget. Clara's heart quickened. The puzzle pieces she'd been chasing since her return were beginning to interlock in ways she hadn't dared imagine. This diary entry spoke of tensions simmering beneath the surface, of alliances forged and betrayals whispered behind closed doors. It was the tapestry of Willow Creek's silence, thread by painful thread. They worked deep into the night, the storm finally breaking outside, with a steady patter of rain against the windows. Each document revealed another layer: a letter from Tom's father, a confession hidden in a neighbor's journal, a photo with faces frozen in a moment of tense celebration shadowed by unease. The next morning, Clara found herself at Tom's farmhouse, the air thick with the scent of earth and wood smoke. The house was modest but sturdy. Sunlight filtered weakly through the cracked window panes, dust motes dancing in the beams. Tom stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders rigid, eyes wary. "You've been digging," he said quietly, voice rough with tiredness. "Some things are better left buried." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I need to understand, Tom. Not just for me, but for all of us. The silence, it's a burden we can't carry forever." There was a long pause, a moment where the fragile barrier between them wavered. Tom's expression softened, the weight of regret pressing down. "Maybe you rewrite. Maybe it's time." Later, in the familiar hum of the town diner, Helen Graves leaned in close, lowering her voice amid the clatter of dishes and murmured conversations. "People don't want to talk about it," she said, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight on the table. "But I remember whispers, stories passed down like warnings. They all tie back to that night, the choices made, the secrets kept." Clara nodded, absorbing the gravity of Helen's words. Each revelation was a thread pulling at the fabric of the town's carefully maintained facade, threatening to unravel the years of silence. As dusk settled, Clara spotted Ilias Harper standing on the steps of the town hall, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. The sharp lines of his weathered face seemed etched with sorrow and stubborn resolve. He caught her gaze and frowned, a silent reminder of the resistance she faced not just from him, but from the collective weight of Willow Creek's past. Within these moments, the story of the town and Clara's family began to merge into one, a shared history of pain, resilience, and the fragile hope for redemption. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the risk of fracture, but also the possibility of healing. As Clara returned to her room that night, the storm finally spent, she opened her journal and began to write. The words flowed with a new clarity, a quiet determination to face the past head-on, no matter the cost. Beneath the quiet stars outside, Willow Creek held its breath, poised on the edge of revelation. The afternoon sun bled weakly through the stained glass windows of the town hall, casting muted colors over the gathered crowd. Tension hung thick in the air, palpable as the murmurs swelled into uneasy silence when Clara Whitmore stepped forward. Her hands, steady yet betraying a slight tremor, gripped the worn leather cover of her mother's diary, an artifact that had become both a beacon and a burden. "We cannot continue to live beneath this shroud of silence," Clara began, her voice carrying through the hall with a quiet strength. "The truths hidden within these pages are the same truths that have kept us from healing, from moving forward. It is time we face them together." A collective breath seemed to catch in the room, eyes darting between Clara and the assembled elders. Among them, Elias Harper sat rigid, his sharp gaze unblinking. When the moment ripened, he rose, the chair scraping against the wooden floor like a warning bell. "Miss Whitmore," Alias's voice was measured but steely, "there are forces at work here that you do not understand. This town's peace, fragile as it is, depends on certain things remaining unspoken. To dredge up the past would be to invite ruin upon us all. You would do well to consider the cost of your crusade." Clara met his stare undeterred. "The cost of silence," she replied softly, "is far greater than the pain of truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Maggie Doyle stepped forward, a stack of aged papers in her hands. Passing them among the gathered townsfolk, she urged, "These documents reveal connections that none of us can ignore. Our histories are intertwined, our grief shared. Only by acknowledging this can we hope to heal." A woman near the back whispered anxiously, "But what if the truth destroys more than it mends?" Tom Whitmore, leaning against the window sill, watched the scene unfold with an expression carved from years of regret. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and strained. "I've lived with these secrets longer than most. They weigh heavy, but hiding them hasn't brought peace, only more pain." Reverend Paul Mason stood silent nearby, his hands folded, eyes dark with turmoil. The conflict between his faith and the town's moral shadows gnawed at him, reflecting the larger struggle playing out before him. The room split, invisible lines drawn in whispered accusations and guarded glances. On one side, those like Elias, clutching the past tightly, fearing the chaos truth might unleash. On the other, Clara and Maggie, emboldened by revelations, pushing for a reckoning. Voices rose and fell, arguments weaving between caution and courage, fear and hope. Some faces softened with tentative understanding, others hardened, eyes narrowing with resistance. The fragile fabric of Willow Creek's community strained under the weight of its history, stretched thin by the burden of secrets long kept. Clara's heart pounded as she felt the tide turning, the silence that once suffocated the town beginning to crack. Yet beneath that fracture lay uncertainty. Would the town choose to heal or break apart? As the meeting adjourned, the somber crowd spilled into the fading light outside, shadows lengthening like the fissures in their collective soul. Clara lingered, gazing up at the quiet stars beginning to pierce the dusk. The lines in the sand had been drawn, and there was no turning back now. The night air carried a chill, wrapping around her like the weight of what was to come. But beneath the quiet stars, a fragile hope flickered, delicate, uncertain yet undeniable, and Clara knew that whatever the cost, the truth was a path they had to walk. The next morning, the town felt different. Conversations that once skirted around old wounds now dared to touch them, hesitating but persistent. At the diner, Helen Graves whispered cautiously to a few trusted ears, her usual gossip tinged with newfound gravity. Sheriff Alan Briggs watched Clara from across the room, his expression unreadable, a history between them complicating every glance. Back at the library, Maggie pored over more documents, her fingers tracing lines of faded ink that told stories of love, loss, and betrayal. The past was no longer a distant shadow, but a living presence demanding acknowledgement. Tom approached Clara later that day, his eyes clouded but resolute. "I'm ready to tell you everything," he said quietly. "It's time you knew the full story." Clara nodded, the weight of the moment settling deep within her. The lines had been drawn, and the unraveling was just beginning. But for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something she had thought lost hope. Beneath the quiet stars, Willow Creek stood at the brink of change, its future uncertain but undeniably alive. As night fell once more, the town lay cloaked in silence, but it was no longer the suffocating silence of old. It was a silence charged with possibility, fragile and trembling, like the first breath after a long winter's sleep. The dawn to come would test them all, and Clara would be there, ready to face whatever truths awaited. Clara Whitmore hesitated at the threshold of the sheriff's office, the familiar creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet stirring a mix of unease and anticipation. The room was cloaked in the soft amber light of a late afternoon sun filtering through dusty blinds, casting long shadows across Alan Briggs' desk, cluttered with reports and an old coffee mug. Alan looked up, his steady eyes meeting hers with a flicker of surprise that quickly gave way to something warmer, more guarded. "Clara," he said, his voice low but sincere, "I didn't expect to see you here again." She offered a tentative smile, the years of distance folding away in an instant. "It's been a long time, Alan, too long." They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, memories threading through their words like fragile silk. weaving the past and present into a tapestry both comforting and fraught with unspoken complexities. The town of Willow Creek, with its quiet streets and shuttered windows, seemed to hold its breath around them as they walked side by side beneath the fading glow of the evening sky. The scent of pine and earth mingled with the distant murmur of cicadas, grounding Clara in a place she once called home yet now viewed through the lens of time and loss. Alan's presence was a steadying force, a reminder of a life left behind and the possibility of trust amidst the fractures of the past. Their conversation drifted from shared histories to the delicate topic of the town's secrets. Each word weighed with care and the unspoken understanding that the truths they sought to uncover were as dangerous as they were necessary. Suddenly, a sharp rustling from the shadowed alley nearby shattered the quiet, drawing both their attention. Alan moved swiftly, positioning himself protectively between Clara and the source of the noise. In that moment, the tension between them was palpable, not just the immediate danger, but the deeper currents of emotion that neither dared to fully acknowledge. Clara's heart quickened, caught between a surge of gratitude for Alan's instinctive care and the lingering fears that had kept her guarded for so long. Later, in the comforting warmth of the town diner, the clatter of dishes and low murmur of other patrons faded into a gentle backdrop as Clara and Alan sat close, sharing a pot of coffee. Their voices lowered, the conversation turning inward to the challenges of loyalty and truth in a community built on silence. Alan's eyes, usually so vigilant, softened as he spoke of his own struggles with the town's past and his hopes for a future where healing might be possible. Clara listened, feeling the fragile threads of connection strengthen, yet aware that the path ahead would demand courage and the willingness to confront not only the town's shadows but their own. As night settled over Willow Creek, the quiet stars overhead seemed to witness the rekindling of a bond that had lain dormant but never broken. For Clara, this reunion was more than a chance encounter, it was a turning point, a beacon of tender hope amid the encroaching darkness. With Alan by her side, the daunting task of unearthing the town's buried truths felt less isolating, though no less formidable. Together, they faced the delicate balance of trust and vulnerability, each step forward a testament to resilience and the possibility of redemption. Yet even as they forged this fragile alliance, Clara knew the stakes had never been higher. The secrets that Willow Creek guarded so fiercely threatened to unravel everything, and the price of truth might demand sacrifices she was only beginning to comprehend. In the quiet moments between revelations and confrontations, Clara wrestled with the dual desires to protect and to expose, to hold on to the past and to break free from its weight. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and promise alike, but bolstered by the steady presence of a familiar face and the rekindling of a trust that could no longer be denied. The kitchen was cloaked in the soft glow of the late afternoon, sun filtered through cracked and dusty windows. The familiar rhythm of the old Whitmore farmhouse creaking with the weight of years and memories. Clara sat opposite Tom, the silence between them thick, stretched taut by anticipation and unspoken fears. His broad hands rested on the worn wood of the table, fingers twitching slightly, betraying the calm he tried to project. "Clara," Tom began, his voice rough and low, "there's something I've carried with me for too long. Something I thought I could bury in silence, but it's time you knew." Clara leaned in, her breath hitching as the gravity of his words settled over her. She had come back to Willow Creek, seeking answers, but the truth she faced now was heavier than she had imagined. Tom's eyes, usually guarded and wary, were red-rimmed and haunted. That night, he said, voice faltering, "When everything changed, when the town's peace shattered, I was there. I didn't just witness it, I was a part of it." The room seemed to shrink as the confession unfolded. Tom spoke of desperate choices made in the haze of fear and confusion, of alliances forged in shadows, and the unbearable burden of guilt that had silenced him for years. Clara's heart pounded, the the details cutting deeper than she had expected, reshaping the narrative she had held on to about her family's past. "I wanted to protect everyone," Tom confessed, "but in doing so, I became complicit. I kept the truth hidden, thinking it would save us all. Instead, it's poisoned everything." Clara's eyes brimmed with tears, the ache of betrayal mingling with a profound sorrow. She saw in Tom not just a man burdened by his past, but a reflection of the town itself, fractured, wounded, yet yearning for redemption. Outside, a wind stirred the fallen leaves, their dry rustle a mournful echo of the secrets that had long suffocated Willow Creek. The distant rumble of thunder rolled across the hills, a dark prelude to the storm of revelation that was breaking between them. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn away, to retreat into the safety of ignorance. But Clara was no longer the girl who had fled this place years ago. She was a woman determined to face the shadows, no matter how painful. "Tom," she said softly, "thank you for telling me. We need to bring this into the light. For all of us." He nodded, relief and fear mingling in his gaze. "I don't know what comes next, but I'm ready to face it." As the first drops of rain began to patter against the window panes, Clara rose and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The night sky stretched vast and quiet above her, scattered with stars that seemed to watch over the town's unfolding reckoning. Beneath those quiet stars, Clara felt the fragile stirrings of hope. The truth was no longer a weight to bear alone. It was a beginning, a chance for healing that had long eluded Willow Creek and its people. The path ahead was uncertain and steeped in pain, but for the first time in a long while, she sensed the possibility of light breaking through the silence. The confession had changed everything, and now Clara was ready to carry that truth forward, no matter where it might lead. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of a new dawn. The reckoning had begun. The night air hung heavy over Willow Creek, thick with more than just the usual stillness that blanketed the rural town. Inside the modest town hall, the faint glow of candlelight flickered in the dimness, casting elongated shadows across the worn wooden floorboards and the faces gathered within. Clara Whitmore stood at the front, her heart pounding beneath a quiet exterior, her voice steady yet charged with the gravity of what lay before them. "We've lived too long under the weight of silence," she began, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Too many truths left unspoken, too many wounds left to fester in the dark. But tonight, that has to end. For Willow Creek to heal, we must speak." There was a murmur, a ripple of uneasy breaths and shifting feet. The room was packed, neighbors, lifelong residents, elders who had watched the town age alongside them. For years they had skirted around the shadows of their shared past, clutching at the fragile veil of peace that ignorance had afforded. But the presence of Clara, the prodigal daughter who had returned to stir up old ghosts, had changed the atmosphere. Maggie Doyle sat near the back, her curly auburn hair catching the candlelight as she nodded encouragingly. Reverend Paul Mason's calm, wary gaze met Clara's briefly, a silent offering of support amidst his own turmoil. Sheriff Alan Briggs stood near the entrance, his expression guarded but attentive, while Helen Graves clutched a folded napkin tightly, her usual warmth tempered by the weight of anticipation. The silence stretched until Tom Whitmore, Clara's estranged uncle, rose slowly. His broad shoulders seemed to carry the entire history of Willow Creek's pain. His lined face was pale, and his hands trembled as he cleared his throat. "I've held back long enough," he said, voice rough and cracking under its own strain. "There are things I buried, deep things I thought silence could protect me from. But it hasn't." He paused, swallowing hard as his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was part of it, of the secrets that tore this town apart, and I'm sorry." A hush fell over the room, the weight of his confession settling like a tangible presence. Clara felt a shiver run through her, not from cold, but from the raw vulnerability flooding the space. One by one, others began to speak, soft voices at first, hesitant and trembling, then growing stronger, weaving a tapestry of pain, regret, and long-suppressed guilt. Elias Harper, the town elder who had been steadfast in his opposition to Clara's investigation, surprised everyone by stepping forward. His weathered face, usually etched in stern lines of resolve, betrayed a flicker of brokenness. "I've carried this shame," he admitted quietly, believing that keeping silent was protecting us all. "But I see now it only buried the pain deeper." The room seemed to exhale as the collective silence fractured. Tears were shed, hands reached out to steady trembling shoulders, and the invisible chains that had bound Willow Creek's hearts began to loosen. Clara's own chest felt lighter, even as a swirl of emotions relief, sorrow, hope washed over her. Outside, beneath the quiet stars, the cool breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sound Clara had not heard in years. The tentative murmur of voices no longer afraid to be heard. The night was still, but it was no longer silent. It was a beginning. Yet, as Clara walked alone into the crisp air, the weight of what was yet to come pressed on her. Could the town truly heal from decades of pain? Could she herself find peace in the unraveling of the past? The questions lingered, unanswered, but for the first time, they felt possible to face. The fragile hope that had taken root under the quiet stars was a promise whispered on the wind, a promise that healing, though slow and painful, was within reach. And as the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Clara knew the hardest part was not speaking the truth, but living in its wake. The sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting a warm but fragile glow over the town as it settled into the uneasy quiet that had taken hold since the revelations. Clara Whitmore stood at the threshold of the town hall, her heart pounding with the weight of what she was about to do. The room inside was already filling with familiar faces, some weary, some exhausted, all bearing the marks of months of silence shattered and confidences finally spoken. Her gaze swept over the crowd, Tom Whitmore, his broad frame tense but softened by the wariness in his eyes. Maggie Doyle clutching a worn notebook, a steady anchor amid the gathering storm. Elias Harper, standing rigid like a sentinel of the old order, his sharp eyes flickering with a mixture of resentment and reluctant acceptance. Sheriff Alan Briggs, calm but watchful, Helen Graves offering quiet support from the back, and Reverend Paul Mason, hands folded, his expression one of solemn hope. Clara cleared her throat, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steady but gentle. "I know these past weeks have been hard. Harder than any of us expected. The truths we uncovered have shaken the very foundation of our community and our families." A murmur spread through the crowd, a blend of agreement and apprehension. Clara took a breath. "But I believe that facing these truths is the only way forward. We cannot heal if we continue to hide behind silence and fractured facades. We must find a way to come together, to listen, and to support one another." Tom shifted beside her, adding quietly, "It's not easy. I've carried my share of guilt and regret for years. But hearing all of you sharing our stories, it's starting to lift some of that weight." The room remained silent for a moment before Maggie stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "Our histories, painful as they are part of who we are. Preserving them and acknowledging them gives us a chance to learn, to grow. We owe that to ourselves and to the generations to come." Outside, the last light of day faded, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. Clara felt a flicker of something fragile and precious, hope. But she knew this was only the beginning. The town's wounds were raw, the path to healing uncertain and steep. Later, on the porch of the family farm, Clara and Tom sat side by side in the quiet evening. The air was thick with unspoken words, the golden light dwindling as shadows stretched long across the land. Tom broke the silence, his voice low and rough. "Clara, I'm sorry for the things I did, the things I didn't say. I wanted to protect you, but I see now I only added to your pain." Clara's eyes glistened in the twilight. "We both carry scars, Tom. But maybe if we face them together, they won't define us anymore." In the library, the soft rustle of pages was a comforting backdrop as Clara and Maggie pored over fading photographs, and brittle letters. The dust motes danced in the slanting light, silent witnesses to the stories they uncovered, a tapestry woven with loss, betrayal, and resilience. Each fragment pieced together a narrative not just of a family, but of a town struggling to reconcile its past with a hopeful future. At the diner, the comforting clink of cups and low hum of voices created a fragile bubble of normalcy. Helen moved gracefully among her guests, offering warm smiles and gentle words. Here in the shared space of everyday life, the townspeople began to find common ground, a first step toward rebuilding the bonds that had frayed under the weight of secrets. Clara knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But beneath the quiet stars, amidst the shattered facades and tentative reconciliations, there was a promise that healing, however slow and painful, was possible. And that from the depths of their shared pain, a new beginning could emerge. As the night deepened, Clara lingered outside, breathing in the cool air, the vast sky above a reminder of the vastness of possibility. She felt the weight of the past. Yes, but also the stirrings of a future waiting to be written. With a steady heart, she turned back inside, ready to face whatever came next, believing that even in the darkest nights, melancholic hope could light the way. The fragile piece of Willow Creek was breaking, but from its fractures, the town's true story would rise, stronger and more honest than ever before. And Clara Whitmore, returning daughter and reluctant witness, would be there to see it unfold. The cemetery lay draped in the soft embrace of twilight, the dying light painting the sky in hues of lavender and deep indigo. Clara Whitmore stood motionless before her mother's grave, the cold stone etched with a name that had haunted her dreams for years. Around her, the world seemed hushed, as if holding its breath in anticipation. The scent of damp earth mingled with pine needles crushed beneath her boots, and a distant owl's call echoed through the stillness, piercing the quiet with its mournful cry. In her hands, Clara unfolded the delicate piece of parchment she had found hidden within the pages of her mother's diary, the last unrevealed fragment of a story long buried beneath layers of silence and sorrow. Her fingers trembled slightly, the weight of what she was about to uncover pressing upon her like the heavy night air. "Clara," a voice broke the silence, rough and hesitant. Turning, she saw her Uncle Tom approach, his broad shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible burden. The lines etched deep into his weathered face betrayed years of regret, and his eyes, usually guarded, shimmered with unshed tears. "I never wanted you to find out this way," Tom said, his voice cracking. "But it's time. The town deserves the truth, and so do you." Clara nodded, a mixture of dread and relief stirring in her chest. She gestured toward the circle of familiar faces gathered quietly behind them: Maggie Doyle, her steadfast friend; Elias Harper, the town's unyielding sentinel; Sheriff Alan Briggs, whose steady presence had recently become a balm; and Reverend Paul Mason, whose calm faith had been a guiding light in the darkness. Tom took a deep breath and began to speak, weaving a narrative that had been silenced for decades. He told of the pivotal night when fear and misunderstanding spiraled into tragedy, implicating families across Willow Creek, including their own. As the story unfolded, the collective silence that had suffocated the town for so long began to crack, releasing a flood of long-suppressed pain and remorse. Elias Harper stepped forward next, his usual stoicism faltering under the weight of the confession. "We kept this secret to protect each other," he admitted, his voice low and wary. "But in doing so, we only buried ourselves deeper in guilt." The crowd was silent, absorbing the magnitude of what was revealed beneath the quiet stars. Clara felt the full force of years of hidden truths pressing upon her, and yet within that heaviness, a fragile hope began to take root. She looked up, meeting Maggie's warm, steady gaze. The librarian's hand found hers, a silent pledge of support. Sheriff Alan and Reverend Paul exchanged glances, their expressions tinged with cautious optimism. For the first time since her return, Clara allowed herself to envision a path forward, not one free of scars or sorrow, but one where healing could begin. The choice lay before her: to shield the past, preserving a fragile peace built on silence, or to embrace the painful truth fully, risking upheaval for the chance of genuine reconciliation. As the night deepened and stars shimmered overhead with quiet brilliance, Clara felt the weight of the moment settle around her like a mantle. The town of Willow Creek, fractured yet resilient, stood poised at the crossroads of its history and future. With a steadying breath, Clara whispered into the night, "It's time to speak." The words hung in the air, carried gently on a breeze that stirred the leaves and whispered through the branches. Beneath the quiet stars, a new chapter was beginning, one of truth, forgiveness, and the slow, tender work of healing. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Clara knew that whatever came next, she would face it with open eyes and a hopeful heart. The night had settled over Willow Creek like a soft, dark blanket, the stars above piercing the velvet blackness with gentle, steady light. Clara Whitmore stood at the edge of the town cemetery, her breath visible in the crisp air, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth stirring a deep, atching nostalgia within her. The revelations from the past weeks had carved open old wounds, and yet beneath the weight of those truths, a fragile hope began to take root. She looked down at the freshly tended graves, their markers worn but cared for, and thought of the stories they held, stories of love, loss, guilt, and resilience. The silence that had once suffocated this town was no longer absolute. It had cracked, letting in light and air, just as the stars above illuminated the night. Clara felt the cool breeze brush against her skin, carrying with it the promise of change. Behind her, a small group of townspeople gathered around a bonfire near the community center. The flames cast flickering shadows on faces etched with years of pain, and the tentative softness of forgiveness. Voices low and hesitant at first began to rise in story and apology, weaving a delicate tapestry of shared humanity. Helen Graves, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, recounted a memory of a neighbor long gone. Sheriff Alan Briggs nodded silently, his usual stoicism giving way to a rare smile as he recounted a moment of kindness he had witnessed in these very streets. Maggie Doyle moved among the group, her auburn curls catching the firelight, gently encouraging those reluctant to speak. Her warmth was a balm, a reminder that even the darkest histories could be preserved with care and compassion. Nearby, Reverend Paul Mason offered quiet prayers, his voice steady but imbued with the weight of his own struggles, embodying the community's moral reckoning. Earlier that evening, Clara had shared a long and quiet conversation with Tom Whitmore in the kitchen of their family home. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and fading sunlight filtering through lace curtains. Tom's broad hands rested on the table, weathered and collapsed, as he looked up to meet Clara's gaze. Words that had once been too painful hung between them, but slowly, carefully, they began to unravel the tangled threads of their shared past. "I never wanted to lose you," Tom admitted, voice rough but sincere. "But I was afraid that digging deeper would only bring more pain." Clara reached out, placing her hand over his. "Sometimes pain is the only way through. We don't have to carry it alone anymore." This moment, fragile and profound, marked the first true step toward healing their fractured bond. Back at the library, the smell of aged paper and dust filled the air as Clara and Maggie sorted through stacks of letters, diaries, and photographs. Each relic was a piece of the town's mosaic, sometimes jagged, sometimes beautiful. Their work was painstaking but purposeful, a commitment to honoring history without allowing it to imprison them. "This is just the beginning," Maggie said softly, her eyes shining with determination. "We owe it to everyone to tell the full story, no matter how hard." Clara nodded, the weight of her journey settling comfortably on her shoulders. She had come home seeking answers, and though the path had been strewn with shadows, she now glimpsed a horizon bright with possibility. As the fire dwindled and the crowd slowly dispersed under the watchful stars, Clara lingered a moment longer. The silence was different now, no longer a shroud, but a space for reflection and renewal. Can a town truly heal? She whispered into the night. The stars seemed to shimmer in reply, steadfast and eternal. With a deep breath, Clara turned toward the future, ready to walk forward beneath the quiet stars. The days that followed unfolded with a gentle rhythm of rebuilding. Conversations that had once been impossible now found their way through cautious glances and tentative words. The town hall hosted meetings where voices, once silenced by fear, spoke openly of pain and hope. Elias Harper, though still wary, began to listen, the lines of resistance softening in the face of shared humanity. Clara's journal, once a private sanctuary, became a communal testament. Her careful chronicling of the town's stories invited others to add their voices, creating a living archive of Willow Creek's journey from darkness into light. And though the scars of the past remained etched into faces and memories, they no longer defined the town. Instead, they became part of a collective strength, a reminder that healing was neither swift nor simple but possible when met with courage and compassion. Underneath the quiet stars, Willow Creek breathed anew, fragile yet unyielding.